Hey, it's Miss Virgo. I'm here with a video about understanding Gemini energy, all right? So firstly, Gemini energy is a mutable sign. It's an air sign. It is about ideas. Gemini is also a sign that is associated with duality, okay? So let's just put that out there about some things that you might have heard about Gemini. So the Gemini Sun person, in general, the Gemini Sun person is going to be someone who is very expressive in terms of what they think, okay? This person sometimes is going to come across as someone who has an opinion about everything, okay? And that can work in some cases. Sometimes it can be kind of, annoying to some people if it's like every time the topic comes up, Gemini's like, oh, I know about that, or I know about that, or I have a friend who did that. But it's their way of relating to you, because Gemini Sun is really good at social gatherings. Are really good at being very social. So a lot of Geminis have a lot of friends, or they could be very popular because they like to talk, okay? They kind of like to, figure things out, figure people out. They're very curious. Geminis also love to learn, whether it's book learning, actually learning, whether it's about learning about other people's culture, whether it's about learning about different topics, history, or, any subject. Some Geminis seem to know a little bit about everything, okay? In terms of, intellect, Gemini is also ruled by Mercury. And Mercury, helps, as an air sign, helps them like be very, very, intellectual. They think very fast. They think really well on their feet, okay? So, when you think about the Gemini Sun person, it's usually this very like communicative person who's very social, likes to talk, knows a little bit about everything, friendly, approachable type of person. That's usually the Sun, okay? And for the most part, they like freedom, okay? So Gemini Sun people tend to be they're not really locked into plans, okay? They are people who kind of don't like going by schedules. They're mutable air. Okay, so that means like there's a need for freedom. Not like the other sign ruled by Mercury is Virgo. And Virgo likes order, like structure, like schedules, plans, likes to know things ahead of time, likes to find details. Gemini is a little bit more free. So with, the way that Mercury affects Gemini is slightly different because it's an air sign, all right? Now the moon, our moon is how we, how we relate internally. It's our emotions, it's our feelings, and how we process those thoughts and feelings. Gemini moon people in general seem to be very communicative about how they feel. Now, when we think of the moon and the emotions, it does not mean that Gemini moon is overly emotional just because they communicate with you. It's no, they process their emotions through how they feel. So there's this kind of sense of like, hey, can I talk to you about how I feel? Or hey, can I talk to you? I've been thinking this. What do you think? And sometimes it comes across like they want you to confirm how they feel about things. Sometimes it can come across that way. But Gemini moon is not really a person who's going to hold a lot of things back. Whether they can be very tactful. Gemini has a good way with words, okay? But Gemini moon people often can change their mind a lot. When you think about Gemini, people say things like, oh, they're bipolar. It's not so much of that, it's not so much of using this very, using this term to identify how Geminis are, right? It's not this idea of like, oh, they're bipolar, and like overusing a term, a real medical term to describe, some people, a disorder that people have. No, it's Geminis have duality and they're mutable. So what comes across to some people as like flighty, or they're not rigid, there's no structure there, is really just like this duality of, hey, it can go this way or it can go that way. And the moon and Gemini person can be like that sometimes. So sometimes to some people it can come across as like, well, how is your mind changing so fast? How are your feelings changing so fast? Like, how is that possible? And that's because of that mutable air energy that Gemini possesses, okay? Now, when we have our Gemini rising people, these people are very talkative. And typically, no matter what their sun sign is, they're very talkative. They will talk about almost any subject. They're naturally curious about people. These are people in a social gathering who will tend to find someone to talk to, or they probably would have talked to a lot of people by the time the night is over, right? One thing that can be found in Geminis, though, and I think especially in Gemini risings, because remember, your rising is your reputation, how other people view you. Gemini rising, some of them, especially if they have a lot of Gemini energy. So again, when you look at someone's chart, it'll tell you how much of a sign or influence something is. They can be kind of gossipy, okay? Gemini energy can be kind of, they rack up all this information. Like, they know a lot of things because they're curious and they ask questions. They're really not, these are not really, what's the word I want to say? Introverted people. Now, yes, you can find an introverted Gemini. Of course, you can find an introverted anyone. But, like, let's say there's someone that has a lot of Gemini energy in their chart. They're really not introverted. Doesn't mean they don't have a secret self. They can, but it means, like, on the outside, people are not going to view them as introverted. So there can be, like, the Gemini rising people tend to be very, very social. Some risings can be even more social than the Gemini sun person, okay? Because the sun is what we project, is what we're conscious of. And the rising is how other people view us, okay? So through the way that you behave, people view a Gemini rising person as, like, someone who's fun to be around. They're fun to be around. They are good, conversationalists. They can talk about almost any subject. They know a lot about a little bit about everything. They're fun to be around. There could be also this idea that, but they're kind of gossipy or flighty. Gemini rising people, sometimes people might not always feel they can depend on them in some cases because, again, mutable air doesn't like restriction. It does not mean that they can't be helpful. It doesn't mean they can't follow through. It's just putting them on these rigid deadlines and, like, putting them in a box is really something that's hard for Gemini to do, kind of similar to how it's hard for Sagittarius to be put in a box and confined. Similar to how it can be hard for Aquarius, another air sign. Sagittarius is another mutable sign. So remember, mutable is more like they're not fixed. They aren't the initiators necessarily. They're not fixed, but mutable can go either way. So the good thing about mutable signs, a lot of people look at it like, oh, well, mutable doesn't know which way to go. And you can look at it that way, but another way you can look at it is mutable signs, they have options. Mutable can take any form. Some mutable sign, if you channel the right energy, you can be cardinal or you can be fixed. But mutable is just more open to different outcomes. They're open to different avenues to getting things done. Now let's move on to our Mercury. Mercury and Gemini. First of all, Mercury rules Gemini, so this placement is at home. So anyone with a Mercury and Gemini is a person who's a very fast thinker. They might also be a fast talker. I forgot to say that about the risings, but definitely your Mercury and Gemini person will tend to be they literally speak very fast, okay? Mercury and Gemini person, they're interested in a lot of different subjects. Mercury deals with your communication, your thoughts, and how you learn. So this is a person who probably did pretty well in school. This is a person who and the thing you have to understand about air signs, especially Aquarius and Gemini, because of that intellectual capacity that they have, some of them can take advantage of their intellect, okay? Or not overcompensate. They rely on it, their ability to get stuff done too much because they know they can do it. But sometimes it's like there's a procrastination there with some air signs, especially Aquarius and Gemini. There can be a procrastination there because they're like, well, I can get it done. It's going to be so fast, which works for them, but it might not work for everyone else. Mercury and Gemini, also thing you have to understand is, like, Gemini loses interest quick. They gain interest quick. They lose interest quick. So some Mercury and Gemini people are always trying to learn something new. This might be a person like, oh, you have a new hobby again? Like, what's going on? So the thing that stunts Gemini sometimes, and Mercury and Gemini, can be their knowledge of things only reaches a certain depth because they then get interested in something else. So where your Mercury and Taurus person dedicates their time to learning something, right? I'm giving that example. Mercury and Gemini can, like, know a lot about a lot of different things, but under the surface it might not be as in depth as it could be because they lose interest very quickly, okay? They're also good listeners. They're very good listeners. If you have a person in your life that's Mercury and Gemini, they tend to be, like, able to actually process what you're saying, and actually respond to you. Sometimes you listen to a person, a Gemini person in general, will make you feel like, oh wow, like they're really listening to me. So next we're gonna do Venus and Gemini. So Venus obviously is the planet of love, and also your value, like how do you value things or your possessions, things of that nature, okay? So Venus and Gemini. So Venus and Gemini person is going to be one who needs to be mentally stimulated in a relationship. They really don't, obviously you have to look at someone's whole chart, but yes, it'll be nice if you're good looking, if you're a nice person, all that stuff is great, but a Venus and Gemini person wants an actual mental connection. Like, they want to feel like they know you, and they know that you know you're an interesting person. You can talk about a lot of different topics. Gemini's mind is always racing, so it's very good to have some type of match there where it's a person who can intellectually be on the same grounding. You know, they also like to do different things, similar to, I said, I think Venus and Sagittarius, I think in that video. Venus and Gemini, in order to keep the relationship new and fresh, like they want to do different things. Like they might want to go to a concert, they might want to go to a festival, they might want to, and the thing is, like, they can be spontaneous. The thing with Gemini energy, it can be very spontaneous. It's dual, it's mutable, it's air, wherever the wind blows. Okay, some Venus and Gemini people lose interest in romantic relationships easily. So it does not mean all people will, obviously, but it does mean that, like, there can be a tendency for them to go where the wind blows. There's a game that kids play sometimes in school. It's where the wind blows. Like the kids sit on a desk or something, and then you make a statement. And if the statement applies to you, the kids change seats. And it's like a game, and they move all around. And it's like you don't know where they're going, this way, that way. And it's kind of like that. That's kind of like air energy a little bit sometimes, because, you know, think about air and its physical composition, right? So Gemini, Venus and Gemini can be like, oh, I'm not feeling this person anymore. And sometimes there can be an overlap in some people with this placement's relationships because they get so intrigued, especially if they're mentally intrigued by someone and someone has a lot of knowledge. They'll decide, like, I don't really know if I'm feeling this relationship. But because they love to talk, some of them can get caught up in these relationship situations where they're still in a relationship but they're talking to someone else because they love conversation. Obviously, this is not all Venus and Gemini, but this is a possibility based on that type of energy. Okay, next, Mars and Gemini. So when you have Mars and Gemini, you're combining action with, like, the mind, okay? And how does that actually work and come together? So when you think of Mars and Gemini, that placement is actually one that can be good when it comes to someone being flexible with how things get done. Remember, Mars deals with your aggression, aggression, assertiveness. You know, it's a planet also associated with, like, passion, intimacy in some cases, you know, depending on how you know, how in depth you want to take Mars, because there's different elements to it. But in general, you know, it deals with your drive, you know, your ambition, you know, how do you do things, how do you approach things. It tends to be a very masculine energy, regardless of what sign is paired with Mars, right? But again, it changes, the meaning of that placement changes depending on where it is and what sign. So when you mix it with Gemini, you'll get someone who sometimes can do things on the fly. This is a good placement for getting work done, ideas. Mars in Aries is good for getting tasks done on the fly. Mars in Gemini is good for getting things done on the fly that deal with ideas, okay? Now, the good thing, that's a good thing. Like, this is a person that, if they channel that energy correctly, they're able to actually manifest, you know, action with thinking and get things done and have it be actually really well-intentioned. Now, the problem, though, is that, again, Gemini energy can go where it wants to go. And when you see Mars, who's like drive, energy, and Gemini's like, well, what about this? What about that? So sometimes there can be an indecision there with which way they should actually go, what they should actually do. And that can cause some procrastination sometimes with Gemini's faced with a decision, okay? Because remember, Gemini likes freedom, but sometimes you have to make a decision. So Mars and Gemini can be, it could be, you know, an advantage depending on what the situation is. But at the same time, you have to think about Mars and what it actually does. Mars is driving things forward. So Gemini is going to approach everything from a logical mindset situation. Gemini likes to apply their knowledge to the situation, what they know, in order to get it done. So this is not a sign that's going to work off being necessarily impulsive. A lot of people sometimes say, oh, Geminis are so impulsive. It's not impulsive like Sagittarius or Aries energy. It's actually their mind is trying to figure out what to do. And because there's duality there, there's competing interests, sometimes Gemini just has to make that decision. And it can look like it's impulsive, but you have to understand the energy, the reasons behind it are different than other signs, okay? So I forgot my original point with this. But Mars and I forgot my original point. But one thing I've noticed a lot with Mars and Gemini though are these people are really good at adapting to new situations where things have to get done. And I think I know what I'm saying. They don't rely on their emotions for this. So this is not a Mars and Cancer type of placement. Mars and Pisces, Mars and Scorpio. Gemini uses what they've known, the information they've accumulated. They also use their social connections. They can also use other people to get things done. That is something that a lot of people don't realize sometimes. Gemini people, they use their connections a lot. They have a lot of connections, a lot of them, because they're so social. They know someone here, they know someone there. So sometimes it's like they can procrastinate. They don't want to get something done. They're going to pull on those social connections. Okay. All right. So that is a little introduction about understanding Gemini energy. If you like this video, please hit the like button. Also be sure to subscribe to my channel. Thank you.